Welcome, everyone, to a Monday morning episode of the Call Sheet Daily Podcast here at the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. We are kicking off another week of shows with our Monday morning game ball feature, giving out game balls, call sheet game balls, which I'm sure are highly valued by those about to receive them, virtual as they may be, right? Virtual as they, maybe someday we'll actually have real call sheet game balls to give out. We'll get big enough when we have our own TV show on some major network and we can actually make up really nice call sheet game balls. Ken Wisniewski, CEO of Fans First. Let's go. Let's get on that. But for now, these game balls are virtual and they go out to some of the top performers in the NFL this past weekend. Week 2. What a weekend of football on both the collegiate and the NFL level. We'll talk about college football on my Thursday show, The Portal, where the topic will be, is the quarterback class, the college quarterback class of 2026, which is supposed to be so stellar, is it really that good? Because what we've seen from the college quarterbacks so far has been less than impressive. But as for the games on the field on Saturday, phenomenal stuff. And the NFL did its part, upheld its part of the deal by giving us some great games on Sunday as well. So let's talk about some of the top performers, call sheet game balls. Game ball number 1, Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, quarterback, New York Giants. I put out a tweet on Sunday morning, 5 thoughts on today's NFL games, and one of those thoughts was this: Russell Wilson is probably playing for his career today. And that may be a bit dramatic, but I think it's true. You look at week 1, the Giants were terrible on offense. They score 6 points in a loss to the Commanders. Russell Wilson goes 17 out of 37 throwing the football. Everything looks dysfunctional. Brian Daboll is getting into arguments on the sideline with various players. And you have Jackson Dart sitting there in the bullpen. A young man who lit it up in the preseason. There's a big buzz around him in New York. Brian Daboll is potentially coaching for his career in New York. How long would he go with an aging Russell Wilson who's not playing particularly good football? And throw in on top of that, Russell Wilson was basically run out of his last 2 stops. Sean Payton wanted nothing to do with him in Denver. He moves on to Pittsburgh, and the Steelers at the end of the year had an opportunity to re-sign him, and they made it pretty clear that they wanted to go in a different direction. That they opted for 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers over bringing Russ back. And then he goes to New York. And I thought an interesting thing that Brian Daboll said after the game yesterday was that one of the reasons they brought Russell Wilson to New York was they valued his leadership. And I thought that was interesting because there have been conflicting reports about how well Russell Wilson has been liked in some of the locker rooms he's been in over the years. And so to bring him in as a leader was an interesting comment. But yesterday, playing potentially for his starting job, because if he'd thrown up another stinker yesterday and the Giants were 0-2, and they have one of the hardest schedules in the NFL, particularly in the front half of the season, it would have been very tempting for Brian Daboll to go to that bullpen and bring in Jackson Dart and put Russell Wilson on the bench from where, at this point in his career, he may never get another chance to be a starter. But that didn't happen because Russell Wilson went out and threw for 450 yards, 3 touchdowns, rallied the Giants from behind several times in the fourth quarter, punctuated it all with a signature Russell Wilson moonball from midfield to Malik Neighbors with about 30 seconds left in the game to give Dallas a lead that looked like would hold up. A 3-point lead with about 25 seconds left in the game. But unfortunately, they had to kick the ball back to the Cowboys. And my second call sheet game ball goes to the individual who then came out for Dallas after the Cowboys had completed a couple of passes and moved the ball just over midfield. Brandon Aubry, the kicker, game ball number 2. And Brandon Aubry, as casually as you could possibly kick a 64-yard field goal, did just that. Stepped in and matter-of-factly, and I say matter-of-factly, I watched it live. There wasn't any particular excitement or enthusiasm from Brandon Aubry as he jogged onto the field. He jogged onto the field with all the urgency of a guy about to kick an extra point, which tells you he felt very confident he was going to make that kick. And he should. Brandon Aubry has made more kicks from 60-plus yards than anyone in NFL history. He's got 5 of them now. Listen to this statistic. I think this is fascinating. We've been talking a lot on the show about how good the kickers have gotten. There have been 43 field goals of 60-plus yards in NFL history. That's more than I thought. I thought the number was like 20. 43. There have been 43 field goals of 60-plus yards in NFL history. 21 of those have occurred this decade. So in the last 5 years. So basically half of all of the 60-plus yard field goals in NFL history have occurred since 2020. And Brandon Aubry has 5 of those. And he jogged out there at the end of that game with the ball set on his own 46-yard line. And he knocked that thing through the uprights with a couple yards to spare. And he did it about as matter-of-factly as you possibly can. He is an unbelievable weapon. Kickers around the league have become unbelievable weapons. We saw Pittsburgh's Chris Boswell beat the Jets with a 60-yard field goal in the final minute in week 1. We saw Brandon Aubry kick a 64-yard field goal on the final play to tie the Giants, send that game to overtime, and then Brandon Aubry won it with an overtime field goal. So, Russell Wilson, Brandon Aubry in a wildly entertaining Cowboys-Giants game. Call sheet game balls. Third call sheet game ball. This actually goes out as a set to the entire NFC West. The NFC West has started the season 7-1, and the only loss in that group of games is the Seattle Seahawks losing to another NFC West team, the San Francisco 49ers. So outside of the division, when the NFC West has played teams outside of its own division, they're 6-0. And it's interesting, there aren't any real signature wins. I mean, maybe, Seattle going into Pittsburgh and winning by 14 points, bit of a surprise, but that was a much closer game than the final score indicates. That's a tie game with the Steelers having first and goal at the Seattle 5-yard line late in the third quarter. And Pittsburgh turns the ball over, and then Seattle kind of takes over from there. Maybe that's the signature win in the division. Maybe it's the Rams beating Houston in a close game in week 1. But there aren't any real, there's wins over Carolina and Tampa Bay or New Orleans, and some not very good teams. And there's a lot of close wins. I think here's an interesting number. All 4 teams in the NFC West have a positive point differential. They're the only division in football right now where that is true. But those point differentials are minimal. The Rams are plus 19 on the year. The Cardinals are plus 12. The Seahawks are plus 10. The 2-0 49ers are just plus 9 point differential. Close games. They've been involved in a lot of close games. Well, you know what wins close games? Good coaching and good quarterback play. Good coaching and good quarterback play win close games. And so what that tells you is they're getting those things in the NFC West, and it's true. Kyler Murray's been solid so far for the Arizona Cardinals, as solid as he's been to start a season in his career. Matthew Stafford is Matthew Stafford. He went over 60,000 passing yards in week 1. He threw for 298 yards yesterday. We know who Matthew Stafford is. Sam Darnold in Pittsburgh yesterday looked excellent. He looked like the Sam Darnold from Minnesota a year ago, not the Sam Darnold who people remember from earlier in his career. And Brock Purdy gets hurt in San Francisco in week 1, and then Mac Jones comes in. And on a day where you think Christian McCaffrey's going to get 25 carries because they're going to have to run the ball because Mac Jones is the quarterback, they throw it 30 plus times and get a big win. So we know that there are some really good coaches in that division. We've heard for years about Shanahan and McVay, and Mike McDonald was a great DC who won 10 games in his first year as head coach, and Jonathan Gannon out in Arizona seems to have that franchise on the right track. We know there's good coaches in that division, but the quarterback play through 2 weeks has been surprisingly solid. So game ball, NFC West. Game ball, Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions, who looked, I don't want to say terrible in week 1, but terrible adjacent. They were, if terrible had a cousin, they were that in week 1. But then yesterday, with former OC Ben Johnson coming back into the building as the head coach of the Chicago Bears, something that many Detroit Lions players said in the offseason that they took a little bit of offense with. That, Ben Johnson could have gone to a lot of places. He had a lot of suitors, but he chose a fellow NFC North team. He chose, as Amon-Ra St. Brown said yesterday after the game, to see us twice a year. He chose to see us twice a year. And I think a lot of Lions players were, offended is probably the wrong word, but they had an issue with it. They felt like Ben Johnson didn't betray them by leaving. Nobody begrudges a guy in the profession from moving up. Nobody begrudged a coordinator taking the opportunity to be a head coach, but when you do it in the division with one of the biggest rivals of the team you'd been coaching for many years, people are going to have an issue with it. And the Lions showed that on the field yesterday, rolling up 508 total yards. That's a lot of yards. And 52 points. Showing Ben Johnson, hey, look, we rang up 50 plus points with you as our OC on several occasions, but we can do it without you too. And their last touchdown came on 4th and goal on a play action pass. They had run the ball 3 times inside the 10-yard line. They're winning 45-21 midway through the 4th quarter. They'd run the ball 3 straight times, and now on 4th and goal, they run a play action pass and score to top the 50-point mark. And then they pulled out a celebration that kind of mocked Ben Johnson a little bit. The crowd launched itself into an F Ben Johnson chant. Maybe it was all a bit much, and maybe it will come back to haunt them. Again, they have to see Ben Johnson twice a year. They have to go to Chicago later this season. You would think that Ben Johnson will get better and the Bears will get better as his tenure develops. So is Detroit in, I don't know if they ran up the score. Jared Goff said after the game he wasn't thrilled with that last touchdown, the way that it transpired. They asked Ben Johnson about it. Did you think that they ran the score up there? He said, no. He said, it's Dan Campbell. They're going to go for it on 4th down. That's what they do. They just did what they do. So at least publicly, he didn't seem to take offense with it. But you have to believe that there's going to be a little check in Ben Johnson's book as well after this. Bears-Lions. It was already a heated rivalry, and it really upped itself a notch after yesterday. All right, final game ball. Jeff Ulbrich, defensive coordinator, Atlanta Falcons. Is that a name you know? Maybe. Those of you who are astute NFL football fans probably remember Jeff Ulbrich for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, he was the interim head coach for the final few games last year in New York after the Jets moved on from Robert Saleh. He had been the defensive coordinator there and had built a very good defense in New York. But when he moved up and became the head coach, it didn't go well. The transition was a tough one. Things were falling apart in New York. Aaron Rodgers was feuding with Robert Saleh. He inherited a dysfunctional locker room, and it didn't get better. The defense actually got worse because you took a guy who was focused on one thing, and that thing was the strength of the team, and now you gave him all the things to focus on, so that the thing that was their strength suffered because of the fact that he could not pay it the attention that he had done earlier. So his brief stint as the interim head coach in New York didn't go well. He got fired along with the rest of that staff. But then you may remember the weird story that emerged during the NFL draft where Jeff Ulbricht's son somehow got a hold of Shedeur Sanders' private cell number and prank phone called him to tell him that he was being drafted in the first round. And everybody remembers that Shedeur had kind of an epic slide into the fifth round. And Jeff Ulbrich was personally fined something like $300,000, and there were some fines or punishments, I don't remember exactly what they were, that came down on the Atlanta Falcons, where Jeff Ulbrich had been hired as their DC. And that was kind of all we had heard. You probably wouldn't have any reason to pay attention to Jeff Ulbrich otherwise, until last night when his defense in Atlanta absolutely put one on the Minnesota Vikings and their young quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. 6 sacks in a 22-6 win over Minnesota. They held Justin Jefferson to just 3 catches. They harassed poor J.J. McCarthy into an 11 for 21 performance, a quarterback rating of just 37.5. Atlanta's pressure rate last night was 53.3%, which means they got pressure that affected J.J. McCarthy in the pocket on 53.3% of their snaps. That's the highest rate of any game in the NFL since 2018. So when you generate more pressure in a game than any team has in about 7 years, you deserve a call sheet game ball. Call sheet game ball, Jeff Ulbrich. So there you go. Interesting set of call sheet game balls. Russell Wilson, Brandon Aubry, the entire NFC West, the Detroit Lions, and Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich. All right, that is our Monday show. Tomorrow on the program, interesting topic. We're going to look at the undefeated teams in the NFL through 2 weeks and the winless teams in the NFL through 2 weeks, and sort through which of those teams are legit at 2-0, which of those teams are in big trouble at 0-2, who can rebound, who might go the other direction. So we're assessing the top and the bottom in the NFL tomorrow. That's going to be a great conversation. So join me then. Until then, hope everybody has a great day. Take care.